Hello and welcome back to the fourth part of this Restoration Literature series. Today we'll be talking about John Dryden. Dryden was born in 1631 to a genteel family in Northamptonshire. He was 11 years old when the Civil War broke out, and his family sided with the Parliamentarians. As a result of siding with the Parliamentarians, Dryden's family did quite well during the Interim. In 1644, Dryden was sent off to Westminster School, where, under some great scholars, he learned to love classical literature. In 1650, he became a student at Trinity College, Cambridge, where he studied for several years. Now, later on in life, he wrote some pieces that suggest that he greatly appreciated Oxford, and some scholars debate whether he preferred Oxford over Cambridge. But as he wrote in a letter to the Earl of Rochester, a man whom we'll be talking about in a different video, where he said, "Your lordship will judge how easy 'tis to pass anything upon a university, and what gross flattery the learned will endure." Like William Wycherley, Dryden seems to have disappeared into the background upon graduation, as nothing much is heard of him until 1659, when he publishes a work called Heroic Stanzas upon the Death of Oliver Cromwell. This was a poem that celebrated Cromwell and his achievements upon his death. Now, of course, as you know, less than 2 years later, the Restoration occurred, and Charles II returned to England. It was at this time that Dryden wrote a couple of pieces, one of which was titled To His Sacred Majesty, which was a poem that celebrated the royal family. His support of the royal family, as well as his marriage to Elizabeth Howard, who came from a strong royalist family, endeared him to the court, and cemented his position as a strong royalist supporter. The poem that Dryden is arguably most well known for is called Macflecknoe. The poem is a satirical piece aimed at his former friend and fellow poet, Thomas Shadwell. Thomas Shadwell is in the unfortunate position of being only remembered for his association with John Dryden, who had made fun of him in several poems, and with whom he never quite got along. No one quite knows when the argument between Shadwell and Dryden began. However, some scholars suggest that it was when Shadwell insulted the Catholics, at a time when Dryden was considering conversion. Dryden was a Tory, and Tories tended to side with the monarchy. Now, the Tories opposed the Exclusion Bill, which would have seen James II removed from the heir list because he was a Catholic. The Whigs had supported this bill because they did not want to see a Catholic monarch reinstated in England, and Shadwell was a Whig. Another dispute the two men seem to have had was who was the greater writer, Ben Jonson or Shakespeare. Dryden sided with Shakespeare being the greater of the two, and of course modern-day audiences would agree with him because Ben Jonson is not a name that we associate with literature or with anything really. Meanwhile, Shadwell believed Ben Jonson to have been the greatest of the two. Like everything else, writers seem to go in and out of fashion. At the moment, Shakespeare is still in the spotlight, and Ben Jonson has been relegated to the back of the line. But that doesn't mean that Shadwell was entirely wrong of Ben Jonson's talents. After all, Jonson was the first poet laureate, although the title was not official, and technically John Dryden was the first poet laureate. These arguments grew and ended in a battle of wits between Dryden and Shadwell, expressed in published poetry. Macflecknoe is Dryden's response to The Medal of John Bayes, written by Shadwell in 1682. It is a mock-heroic piece filled with satire and irony that depicts Shadwell as the dullest person on the planet. Using rhymed couplets and iambic pentameter, Dryden begins by describing Macflecknoe, who is about to inherit his father's position as king of the land of nonsense. This Flecknoe found, who like Augustus young, was called to empire and had governed long, in prose and verse was owned without dispute, through all the realms of nonsense, absolute. This aged prince now flourishing in peace, and blessed with the issue of large increase, worn out with business did at length debate, to settle the succession of the state. And pondering which of his sons was fit, to reign and wage immortal war with wit, cried, "'Tis resolved, for nature pleads that he should only rule who most resembles me. Shadwell alone my perfect image bears, mature in dullness from his tender years. Shadwell alone of all my sons is he, who stands confirmed in full stupidity. The rest to some faint meaning make pretence, but Shadwell never deviates into sense. Some beams of wit on other souls may fall, strike through and make a lucid interval. But Shadwell's genuine night admits no ray, his rising fogs prevail upon the day. Dryden references many people, from mythology and real life. He insults plays that Shadwell had written, and even mentions poppies, which of course opium is derived from, and which Shadwell had a fondness for. Even the title is an insult, as MacFlecknoe refers to Richard Flecknoe, who was an average and quickly forgotten poet of the day, and Mac is a term the Irish used to refer to someone whose name you don't know. It's very informal and clearly shows that you don't care enough about the person to learn their real name. With this poem, Dryden seems to have wanted to make sure that everyone saw that Shadwell was nothing but a barely average poet. At the beginning of his career, Dryden had gained fame by the publication of his plays. He had worked with the King's Company to produce plays that were performed on stage. And well over a decade before MacFlecknoe was published, he had become the first official poet laureate. During this period, he continued to be a great favorite at court. But upon the accession of James II, Dryden felt that it was safe to convert to Catholicism publicly, and he did so. Unfortunately for Dryden, James II lasted only a few years on the throne before he was gotten rid of in favor of his Protestant daughter, Mary II, and her husband, William. As a result, Dryden lost a lot of favor at court as he refused to support the new monarchy, possibly because Mary and William were forced to sign several documents that signed away some of their power, resulting in a more constitutional monarchy, which made the Whigs very happy, but displeased the Tories. As a result, Dryden lost his position as poet laureate to none other than his enemy, Thomas Shadwell, and he retired and worked on translations until his death in 1700. Today, John Dryden is still considered one of the greatest writers in the English language, up there with Shakespeare. His contribution to satire inspired many other poets, especially Alexander Pope, whose Rape of the Lock is clearly inspired by Dryden's own piece, MacFlecknoe. Another person who Dryden insulted was his old patron, John Wilmot, the Earl of Rochester, who took it so badly that he has been suspected of hiring men who beat Dryden up when the poet was walking around town. The 1679 poem was called An Essay upon Satire, which was written along with the Earl of Mulgrave. These were some of the offending lines. Rochester I despise for want of wit, though thought to have a tail and cloven feet. For while he mischief means to all mankind, himself alone the ill effects does find. And so, like witches justly suffer shame, whose harmless malice is so much the same. False are his words, affected is his wit, so often does he aim, so seldom hit. To every face he cringes while he speaks, but when the back is turned, the head he breaks. Mean in each action, lewd in every limb, manners themselves are mischievous in him. A proof that chance alone makes every creature a very killigrew without good nature.